Muy buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everybody. I am Lorena Toso, and on behalf of CAF Development Bank of Latin America, I would like to welcome you to the second edition of the series Policy Dialogues for Post-Pandemic Recovery. This is a space in which, together with prominent representatives of the governments of the region, a series of documents prepared by CAF specialists and consultants will be discussed related to different areas of interest that promote a policy agenda for the economic and social recovery of Latin America once the COVID-19 pandemic is overcome. During the 5 editions from July to September, we are going to talk about topics related to cross-cutting policies for productivity, sectoral interventions, and support for clusters in key activities, reformulation of social security systems, the closing of the education gap, and institutional aspects to strengthen policy implementation and transparency. This will be addressed. This will also include an analysis of fiscal, financing, and debt sustainability environments. Today, in the second meeting of this cycle of dialogues, the guests will analyze and share some ideas aimed at sectoral policies and clusters in key sectors, agribusiness, tourism, and digital economy. From the event's microsite, you will have the option to select the audio translated into Spanish or English simultaneously. I invite you to share your opinions on social media with the hashtag Diálogos Post-Pandemia, hashtag Diálogos Post-Pandemia, and follow CAF's Twitter account at Agenda CAF. This is where we like to meet and share opinions related to this second meeting. So to begin, I would like to give the floor to Jorge Arbache, CAF's Vice President for the private sector, who will be moderating the two sessions of the day, both the presentation of the studies and papers, as well as a discussion on public policies. You have the floor, Jorge. Good morning, Lorena. Latin America has been one of the hardest hit regions in the world due to the pandemic of COVID-19. So this decline in activity and employment could also weaken the potential that we know has from raw materials in 2015. Due to the deterioration in the allocation of resources due to the shutdown of companies, there has been a loss in human capital, unemployment, and informal jobs, many difficulties in order to level the job offer, the situation of businesses. So the recovery will have to be based on policies aimed at strengthening productivity and growth in the long term. Some of these policies could focus sectors where we know there are productivity gains through innovation, development of clusters, and public-private cooperation. We know that the farming sector and the agribusiness is a sector where many countries in the region have competitive advantages, and the sector of tourism as well, where the impact of the pandemic has been so important, and so its recovery to pre-pandemic levels is expected only in 2023, 2024. The digital industry has expanded, we know, and Latin America has been the source of many tech startups that export services and create quality jobs. Today, we are going to discuss the results and the recommendations of policies of 3 studies made by CAF experts and specialists and guests who will talk about these sectors. We will also focus on the discussions with the help of government experts and representatives about policy implementation. But before we start, I would like to thank participants, presenters, panelists, experts, and the authorities that are here to exchange about policies. I'm confident that with such a rich and renowned group of panelists, we will have a great discussion. So we are going to start talking about the results of the studies, and a question for Nelson Larrea, Chief Executive Officer of the Directorate of Analysis and Technical Evaluation of the Private Sector with CAF. Nelson, what are the main challenges that the sector, the agribusiness sector, has been facing before the pandemic, and they've been accelerated in this scenario? Thank you, Jorge. Good morning to our panelists and participants. Before the pandemic, we already saw that by 2050 we should have an increase in food production, depending on the estimates, of course, related to the growth among the population and the economies, from 50, 70, or 100% food production increase in order to meet people's demands. And in Latin America, we already had backset compared to the last decade, lagging behind in the capacity to access food on the part of the population. And this has an impact on the development goals, number 2 in particular, and the fight against hunger. So COVID has impacted, as you know very well, on these issues related to growth, jobs, and unfortunately, people are more affected in their capacity to access food, regardless of the fact that food is available or not. So the sector that appeared as a strategic sector for mankind, as a vital support, a sector that we should focus on even more than before. And we have seen that it never stopped, and that was something important because countries were able to recover in one way or other. Producers in the agro industry made efforts to really at least not fall. We know that this is an industry that provides food, 70% of availability in many populations. So in one way or other, we start seeing some signs, some alerts related to the resiliency of the sector. The agri-food systems, of course, were affected, and the countries had to react very quickly with contingency funds, and CAF has supported many countries in that direction. But there was a low level of financial inclusion. There were many challenges in the value chain, in particular in the supply chain, the logistics in the sector, a waste of food, 1.3 billion tons of food a year, 1/3 of the global production lost. That was terrible. So how is it possible that there is undernourishment in many places where unfortunately we waste so much food? And then the document emphasizes the issue of environmental sustainability. So we have worked on some intensive production models because there have been large deforested areas, and there are some other challenges that call our attention. So today, we need a more sustainable agriculture. That's a demand that we see, and challenges are in that line. I would stop here. Thank you. Thank you, Nelson. And another question: how can people and countries in Latin America put their policies in order to have more resilient and sustainable agribusiness models? Yes, Jorge, we see that there are huge efforts that probably will have to be enhanced in Latin America. And of course, we need to consider that the budgets of many countries are still allocated to healthcare and emergency situations, and that's reasonable. However, in the near future, probably the countries will have to recover towards these measures that promote sustainability and technologies. We know that there are very important technical advances with the use of drones, for instance, that cut costs and provide for data intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain as well, that are applied in the farmlands, and also the need to recover sustainable production models that are not so dependent or highly demanding of huge shares of chemical sectors. You know that the European Green Pact also exerts pressure, saying that these things will be applied not only to certain areas, but to the entire global supply chain. So we need to adapt ourselves to these challenges. We believe that the institutional structures of our countries will have to get organized in order to push this technology to the right place in an adapted and adequate manner to the value chains. And among other aspects that we also deal with on the document, technical and professional education is crucial, not just for the new agronomous engineers that we need, agricultural engineers that we need, but people who are working on the tech side, on smart technologies, on blockchain, people who are helping and becoming professional in hydrologistics, in sensors, software, drones, because this sector requires that technical support, technological support, and this is very challenging and very promising for Latin American young people. Excellent, Nelson. Thank you very much for raising those important points. Now, I would like to invite Jorge Forteza, who is expert in territorial and business development strategies and governments, to work on tourism. So, Jorge, what about the competitiveness and performance of Latin America in global tourism markets? And what are the trends that we start to see in the market with the pandemic? What are the challenges and opportunities for the region?
Buenos días, Jorge. Buenos días a todos.
Perfect. Good morning, Jorge, and good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to be here with CAF, the Development of Latin America, that's concerned about the important problems. This time we're working on the tourist sector, and as we know, this sector is a dynamic sector of the growth of the services. As we know, services grow more than the world gross product. It represents 10% of the world product, and it generates 300 million. So Latin America has achieved income of 2019 of $100 billion. So this is quite an important industry for Latin America. We represent about 6.8% of the world market, in a market that was growing really fast, a market that was growing in euphoria in up to 2018 to 5 or 4% per year. And all international agencies talked about a scenario of sustainable growth of about 5% per year for the next decades. This was due to the growth of tourism and corporate trips with the model of worldwide companies and the growth of the market of congresses and seminars, and an explosion of individual tourism that was related to the appearance of new middle classes in emerging countries, as in China, that was quite a dynamic, and these were great vendors of tourists. And there's also changes in the industry towards the low-cost industries and companies and all the other models of shared lodging. So towards the end of 2019, we were in a very positive environment, but we could already detect certain alarm signals. In 2019, we had a fall of the growth up to 2% due to international tensions and a deceleration of the movement of the Chinese tourism. And there were also important tendencies of rejecting this mass tourism that had disruptive and destructive effects in certain ecosystems in European cities, and there was a demand of looking for sustainable tourism models. So Latin America, well, we've had a reasonable result, but we could say that we are below the potential of the natural resources, human resources, and cultural resources of Latin America. It's an industry that is quite concentrated. The 10 most important touristic countries with the US and then, well, China, well, it's a European countries, and this has been the case for 20, 30 years. And among these, Mexico is the only one that has been able to achieve this as a destination with a worldwide. Well, Brazil is stagnated, Colombia has been growing, and Peru the same. The impact of the pandemic in Latin America has been drastic, and around 9 million jobs were lost and $160 billion of incomes were lost in tourism in Latin America. Now, if we look ahead, when the market recovers, and the consensus is that the market will take up to 2023 to begin to recover the levels of 2019 with a more demanding market, more limited in corporate trips or tourism, also because of a change in the organization of the companies, and therefore there's less need of face-to-face meetings, and an individual market that is more selective, demanding quality, in which we will not see this exponential growth that we saw before in the Asian countries, for instance, that had created these illusions, for instance. So if we analyze the future with this demand of a more competitive market, and we look at how we can combine two variables: competitiveness in terms of tourism, that is following the World Economic Forum analysts, and these variables with the idea of resilience. And we've had different documents, the Bloomberg Index and resilience of countries. Now, those who have high resilience and high competitiveness are the winners, of course. In the future, we have Australia, New Zealand, several Scandinavian countries, some Asian countries, and the classical European countries are also competitive, but they've had resilience problems, and they still have them. And the problem with Latin America is that it's in the middle, with a middle competitiveness and with a resilience that proved to be quite complex in terms of the pandemic. So therefore, we enter a market that is more difficult. Opportunities for Latin America for this new demand of tourism? Yes, of course, people look to open spaces, natural resources, new senses of lifestyles, new cities, new cultures that are known. Now, clearly, this is not a mass tourism. This is a quality tourism, and it is clearly more demanding. And all the fundamental factors that make the competitiveness of the countries that we will mention later, that is the image of the country, how the country is sold, how it differentiates, and how it delivers the experience as safety or health, security, institutional security. These are elements that qualify a country to compete or not. So we will talk about the opportunities for Latin America. They exist, but this is a market that will be more selective, more demanding in terms of quality and what the destinations need to offer in order to attract these tourists. So this would be the interpretation or the reading of the market and the new trends in terms of the pandemic. Excellent points, Jorge. Now, second question, what would be the key components of the strategy so that Latin American countries can improve the participation in the global tourism market that is being reconfigured? Well, as we said, the first exercise that we've done is to just have an idea of the opportunities. That is, policymakers in Latin American countries need to allocate resources and they need to make the agribusiness or the service sectors grow. So why should they dedicate policy efforts and resources to tourism? Because of what they generate. So we did simulations exercises on certain variables, the recovery, speed of the market at a worldwide level, and if Latin America still keeps this share of 6.8, or if it improves the arrival levels and the average expenditure per day, and this is an indicator of the segment in which we are targeting. I think it's $850 per day, and this is lower to the world average. So we did this simulation, and this allows us to say that Latin America still keeps the market share, and with the recovery of the worldwide market, it could go from 100 billion to 150 billion of income per tourism. And if we keep the similar productivity trends, it's around 9 million jobs that are additional jobs. These are jobs that are distributed regionally, and this make the territories more dynamic, and they can use relatively qualified manpower. And now, if we can improve by 10% our market share, that is, if we can go from 6 to a little bit less than 7%, or if we can improve by 10% our average income, that is going from this $850 per state to 950, well, this combination would give us something really interesting. So we could have $170 billion. So therefore, we would turn into one of the most important export industries in Latin America. Now, we said before, all the classical touristic countries, European countries, added to these new possible winners of these new demands, Asia, Australia, all these countries are doing development strategies to come back better and compete in the tourism market. They work on the image and the proposal of the countries with a segmentation of the demands that is more accurate and with value proposals that are more differentiated. So they work on differentiating these values and they strengthen the delivery of this proposal from the quality of the transport, infrastructure, connectivity, which is a differentiator topic. And generally speaking, in Latin America, we're a bit delayed. The quality of the healthcare system, of course, you don't want to get sick in a country where you don't have a good healthcare system. So security, human resources, and the companies, and this is something that is worth noticing, that is also under studying, is that the tourism sector creates opportunities of the development of small, medium, and large companies. And these are as important as many companies in the industry. When we analyze this, we are proposing in this study development agenda with 3 big objectives. The first is to save the ecosystems that we have, the companies, the manpower, the jobs that we have as the market recovers, and also to make the domestic market more dynamic, that this would allow us to keep the sector relatively active. And as what they are doing in the Asian countries with these corridors between New Zealand and Singapore, there would be certain corridors between neighboring countries that we could dynamize these regional markets, and so as to make sure that we're not destroying the assets and the competitiveness. And in second place is how we can reopen, and how can we open again towards the international market. This seems to be too soon, but we can see European countries that have started to sell aggressively their destinations. So we need to promote and we need to come back to the market to connect again and to improve these capabilities that we will need in terms of connectivity, human resources, infrastructure, and probably certain efforts, since we are a Latin American back, certain efforts among countries in the region, just to see if we can offer joint offers, that is in the Patagonic region, for instance, or in the Amazonic region, or joint offers in the indigenous peoples. And the third stage is if we will be able to increase by 10% our market share, or if we can improve our incomes. And this means to develop these value propositions, to communicate them, to sell them aggressively, to make sure that then those who come here because they have bought this value proposition, well, then we need to deliver with this promise. And this also implies improvements that have to do with competitiveness, that is the quality of the infrastructure, the quality of the healthcare system, the quality of the safety and security, the connectivity quality, the business sector development. Therefore, these are many competitive factors that will also have a role in other sectors. So in these three stages, we need to adapt this for different countries. It's not the same Mexico, Peru, or Argentina, but we believe that policymakers and developers need to guide their efforts along those lines. Thank you, Jorge. The tourism has a potential impact in the job generation, so it's really very important. So thank you for your ideas. Now I will invite Mauricio Agudelo, who's the Senior Executive of the Directorate of Analysis and Technical Evaluation of Infrastructure of CAF. Now, Mauricio, digital economy keeps evolving in an unprecedented way, changing the way in which individual business sectors communicate and they also provide services. So take advantage of this digital economy depends on the availability of the digital infrastructure. How has this digital transformation process moved forward in Latin America and the Caribbean, and which are the opportunities and cases in which digitalization contributes to the recovery and reactivation in the post-pandemic, and which are the priority actions to move forward in this challenge of closing the digital divide and in access to the internet and to move forward in the production and the development of digital economy. Thank you, Jorge, and thank you to other panel members and everyone attending this session. Certainly from CAF, we've been following really close the transforming process of the region in a digital transformation. That is how information technology, IT and communication in homes and how companies and governments can have access to services and goods on the internet. This has allowed us to respond really fast, but last year there was evidence, and I believe there's no secret, that those economies and those societies that had digitalization rate that was more advanced could respond in a more resilient way in the pandemic. How the homes could have access to service, to food or to goods through online platforms, and how companies were able to keep on getting the inputs and how they could distribute the goods through these digital online platforms. And additionally, this digital communication between the vendors and customers, and how more digitalized administrations were able to continue offering these public services over digital or online governments. And we realized in this study that we need to have a dialogue of policies, and we need to have a holistic vision of the problems in Latin America. And this is why we had to analyze how the region has moved forward in all these factors. And if you want to measure from 0 to 100, we have a digitalization level of 42 points in Latin America, and this is quite close to the global average, but it's far away from advanced economies as the US or Western Europe. And therefore, we find certain opportunities and challenges on which we can move forward. If we talk about challenges, the region in the last 10 years has moved forward in an important way in closing this digital divide. We had over 270 million people were able to access the internet, and the region has a penetration of 70% in the use of the internet. Companies, most of the companies already have broadband plans, and 90% of companies have access to the internet in one way or other. And these has implied a series of opportunities. For example, Latin America is one of the regions in which access to social media platforms is really very high, and this is a per capita expenditure in digital content that is really important, close to the worldwide average. But when you look at this from the point of view of the households, this access to the internet is only beginning. If we think of the access of financing online platforms, only 19% of the populations use these access online to have access to payment online. And this is quite far from the OECD countries, in which it's about 70%. When we talk about e-commerce and retailers and the income that comes from retail e-commerce, it's not above 5%, and in advanced economies, this represents 15%. This is at a household level. Now, if we talk about the business sector, digitalization can solve this productivity gap, and I think digital economy in the region shows one of the largest gaps or divides when you compare it with more advanced economies, and this has to do with the innovation and the investment. All these online platforms, all the Latin American technological platforms, we've had certain important cases, but these are just anecdotes, but this implies opportunities, because there's a weight over the GDP, and this can allow economies to grow. And this has to do with accelerating these new technologies, for instance, in the productive sectors, in which challenges are still huge. If we look at the indicators or the investment indicators in technologies, as Nelson said at the beginning, that is in the Internet of Things and blockchain, well, these investments are still below or 4 times below what more advanced economies invest. And this is a huge challenge, because when we have to face a dialogue in a post-pandemic, we need to be able to keep the resilience in the productive sectors, because we have demand shocks as the ones we've had last year. Well, this includes to be able to have a better traceability of the production chains. And additionally, when you see how these companies can insert themselves in these regional chains or global chains in Asian markets, American markets, well, the digitalization of the distribution chains have quite a dependency on digitalization. And another area in which the region can still grow especially when we talk about the digital economy supported in digital industries and knowledge-based, is how we are getting ready towards the future of work, because we talk about human capital and technical and competencies in order to be able to face this digital revolution. Of course, this has to do with posing questions of the skills of science, mathematics, and hot science in the high schools, competencies, and how this intertwine with this need of the productive sector. I think that this is a human capital that could leverage quality employment and the development of digital technologies. This is a critical topic, and a topic in which the region, according to the analysts, if the documents have important gaps or divides, but also opportunities in order to join this new digital economy. And I would leave it here. Jorge. Yes, exactly. This is an important challenge for the business sector and for everyone, but especially for SMEs. This is something very important for our region. Now, I have a second question for you, Mauricio. To recover the path of economic growth will depend on the capabilities of the economies to increase the productivity, and so that the different sectors can deepen their innovation and the application of digitalization. What are the essential elements when we have to build a map in order to deepen the digitalization so that this could be based on digital infrastructure in order to improve productivity and competitiveness of the business sector? Thank you, Jorge, for this question. I would start by answering the last part. We designed a holistic approach, that is, we have a series of indicators, and we believe that infrastructure, digital infrastructure, this topic is a critical one. But we consider that these infrastructures are based on three elements. That is the quality, that is to be able to sustain communications that can carry data with good sustainable communication, also speed and access that is enough to respond to needs, and affordable connectivity, because one of the most important causes of the digital divide, especially in Latin America, in rural areas and low-income sectors, has to do with the accessibility of the broadband plans, because this could represent 14% of the per capita income. So therefore, there's an exclusion of these populations. So there's a potential there of the digital economy. There's also, it needs to be a communication that offers universal coverage. This is critical. So we believe that countries should be more aggressive in these policies of universalization. We not only need to close the digital divide at a household level, because 6 out of 10 households do not have a fixed access to broadband internet. So this implies the impossibility of having access to e-commerce platforms, or to have learning on the internet, or even to have the possibility of accessing the financial markets, for instance, in a scenario of pandemic. So we believe that the structure, digital structures is critical. And this also relates to an important topic that has to do with the redesign of public policies that allow that from the private sector, we have a greater incentive to investing on infrastructure in this digital economy. When we look at the advance of Latin America, and this is a topic that stems from the investment of industry, 77% of mobile coverage. This also implies investing on infrastructure on fiber optic that has a greater coverage at a household and company level, and the countries that were able to be more resilient in the pandemic were those who had a greater coverage of fiber optics. I think this is something very important. Another topic that stems from this is how we encourage in the transformation policies, digital transformation policies, we still lack this transformation. And this not only has to do with something of the Ministry of Technology and Information or communication ministries or departments, but in order to have this integral or holistic change. So this is something important that we should be able to export to other countries. When we talk about the connectivity policies in the education sector, on the healthcare sector, when we talk about agri-industry, we need an element of coordination and articulation that solves this digital divide and that analyzes the infrastructure in a holistic way and that touches upon also training for the future of work. The other element that we believe it's important, and we address this on the document, is financing mechanisms to narrow this divide, because in the fiscal scenarios we believe that there's certain investment mechanisms or these investment disrupted models, that is to have private-public partnerships that allow these infrastructures and that ease this infrastructure with environments that are not connected. Because when we talk about agri-industry or tourism, and you can see this when you visit rural areas where we have the agro-exporting companies in Latin America, where we have the tourism clusters, there we have the digital divide. And when we talk to the people, they don't have 4G coverage, and this also restrains the development of all these technologies of the fourth revolution, IoT or blockchain. So these blockchains cannot take off and they cannot be part of the value chain. So this is a huge challenge still. So we need to solve how we deploy the infrastructure within financing mechanisms that foster the rural and the urban areas. And the other element that is also critical is training or education in terms of human capital that can answer to these challenges. And we also tackle this in an integral way in the document, and we believe that it will be a good instrument or a good tool for the discussion of public policies with government authorities. Yes, the agenda of the digital economy is not an option for the countries of the region. It's a need so that they can participate in the 21st century. That is for the population, the companies, and everyone. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor back to Lorena.
Con mucho gusto, seguimos adelante.
Thank you. We are going to continue. Thank you, Jorge. Thanks to the experts who shared very interesting studies. All these studies are available for download at the cioteca.caf.com website, where you can find everything that has been discussed. And of course, the idea is to move towards the future. So I would like to remind you that you can share your opinions on social media with the hashtag that we are using, which is Diálogos Post Pandemia, hashtag Diálogos Post Pandemia, and you can follow CAF's Twitter account at Agenda CAF. So we can meet there in social media to exchange views. And I would like to invite you to participate in the next 3 editions. This is our second meeting of these dialogues. You can sign in at the website www.caf.com, where you can register for the upcoming editions of these meetings. And you will also be able to do it through social media at hashtag at AgendaCaf. So now we are going to open the next session. Jorge is going to moderate. this session. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lore, I'm going to switch to English.
Persuade to talk about the tourism sector. Mr. Avinash is chairman of the CARICOM Commission of the Economy and was chairman of the Regulatory Subcommittee of the UN Commission on Financial Reform and chairman of the Warwick Commission on International Financial Reform. He was a member of the UK Treasury, the Audit and Risk Committee, and the Pew Task Force to the US Senate Banking Committee. He was also Distinguished Advisor, Financial Sector Law Reform Commission of India, and has been a visiting scholar at the IMF. He's a former governor of the London School of Economics and 2010 president of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. He was elected trustee of the Global Association of Risk Professionals and of the Royal Economic Society. He won the Jacques de la Rosière Award in Global Finance from the Institute of International Finance and was voted one of the top 3 public intellectuals in the world on the financial crisis by the panel for Prospect magazine. Mr. Avinash, I have 2 questions for you. What has been the impact of the pandemic on the tourism sector of the Barbados and CARICOM? Which trends do you foresee in the reconfiguration of the market that could imply threats or opportunities for Barbados and other members of CARICOM?
Thank you very much, Jorge. And the Caribbean is, of course, a very interesting regional member of CAF and our region because it is the most tourism-dependent region in the world. It also, I think, offers some interesting lessons. We have some great success stories in the sort of price-sensitive area, like the Dominican Republic, and great success stories in high-end tourism. We talked earlier about the importance of Latin America moving up the value chain in terms of high-end tourism. But there are benefits from being a very tourism-concentrated region. But of course, in this crisis, there were clear costs. We are the most tourism and travel-dependent region in the world. And that's why if you look at the top 20 countries that had the biggest economic contraction in the entire world, a big chunk of them are Caribbean countries. Barbados, where I'm speaking to you from, was probably the 10th biggest contraction in the economy, something like a 17 to 18% reduction of national income. And countries like Aruba and Antigua and St. Kitts all suffered quite significantly. Tourism revenues fell by 90%, 90%. And tourism represented around 40% of employment. So you could imagine our national unemployment rates went up to around somewhere between 30 and 40%. It was very hard to measure at that particular time. And one of the benefits of tourism became one of the casualties. So one of the benefits of tourism is it is a sector that has tremendous linkages and normally, therefore, very supportive of a national economy. Linkages towards the service sector, towards the agricultural sector, towards other tourism-related things like restaurants and transport, etc. So it was a fairly cataclysmic event, 30-odd% unemployment. Our social security systems were severely tested. And if we didn't have them, we would probably have had a fair amount of social and economic unrest, given the scale of this problem. What have we learned? Well, I was very interested with Maurizio's presentation because the delivery economy emerged in this crisis. And even though the Caribbean is not the quickest place to do business, very quickly a number of delivery companies emerged and were set up. I remember one being set up in 3 days, and remarking to the young female entrepreneur that I'd spent the last 12 months trying to improve doing business, and she seemed to have managed very well in just a couple of days. The getting money to people. So before the crisis, 20% of all of our pensioners got their pensions via a check. And just the other day, that number is now up to 60%. So the crisis really gave a tremendous impetus, enthusiasm, drive behind the delivery economy, the making the public sector more digital, and all of those things are happening. What have we learned in terms of going forward? I think tourism will be back. I'm not as pessimistic as was earlier said. I don't think it will be 2023. We're already seeing a huge amount of pent-up demand from our source markets. So we probably will be pretty booked, depending on the course of COVID, probably by 2022. We're not a business tourism destination, and I think that is probably the area that will be most impacted long-term by COVID. We have opened up a new avenue of tourism, the so-called digital nomad. So Barbados was one of the first countries to launch the 12-month stamp. So the idea is wherever you worked, you come to Barbados for 12 months. You can use our fiber optic cable with amazing broadband speeds and work from Barbados for 12 months. You're able to be resident here, and you won't be taxed because you've been here for 12 months in terms of income. You will pay all your sales taxes and all those other things, so we benefited a lot. This became a huge success. I think it really made us think about the digital nomad as an important sector for tourism. And it made us think that the future of tourism is in some of these longer term things, like education tourism, health tourism, lifestyle tourism. And these things are less sensitive to a pandemic. And so that's the way we're evolving. And of course, my final point would be that the more we attract these digital nomads, the more it forces us to be a very efficient place to work, the more our people will be diversifying out of tourism into selling products digitally to the rest of the world, professional services. And that really is our business model. And we think that's the business model that will make us more sustainable and resilient. Our vision from a development point of view is that our people have the most amazing education, and they're able to sell professional services down a broadband connection to all over the world, from China, India, to the United States. And this means updating our type of education. It means broadening the education. And in the old days, education was partly about deciding what it is that we teach people. And now, because of digital education, online education, it's now more about encouraging people to find things that are available. We've just signed a contract with a company called Coursera, which means that every Barbadian citizen is now able to access around 50,000 courses online as part of our development model. And what we found is we've gone from having too little education to almost a tyranny of choice of too many things. And to help our citizens, we actually need to curate. We need to help to organize what it is that's available out there that they can have access to make sure they can take full advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In other words, the threats are there, but one has to be innovative in order to fight the situation. And apparently, Barbados is doing a very good job. I have a second question for you. Which strategic initiatives should Barbados develop to defend or improve its competitive position in the emerging global tourism market?
Well, I was said earlier, we're a small market. And I think our view is that when you're in a small market and when you have a fragile environment, the only real solution is to go up market. It's to make every square inch of your beach count, because your beach is fragile. It is linked to your environment, to your reefs, to all of these things. But if you go up market, and we've been able to go up market, in many of our segments, the average daily spend is $2,000 per day, and so we're very much at the higher end. But you can go up market by being small and exclusive, but you need to deliver good service. And so we need to continue our training on that. The other thing we found is that people, they want a sophisticated, you mentioned earlier in your introduction the importance of clusters. If we want to get a certain type of tourist who spends a lot of money, we need to offer them a lot of services. It's not just a fantastic beach and a great hotel and a great restaurant, a Michelin star restaurant. We have a couple coming on stream. We also need to make sure we've got babysitting services. We've got specialized educational services for your kids when they're here. We've got amazing things to do in water sports. And so we need to broaden the type of things that we offer people. So I think that's what we're trying to do, continue moving up market with better service, better products. And the key to service, and that's why training is so important, is empowering your staff, that they can make decisions themselves and they can look after their wards and offer them a great service. And we've got further to go in that front, but that's the direction of travel.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Avinash, for being with us today and for sharing your views and your recommendations. I turn now into to Spanish again. Me gustaría de invitar ahora
and I would like to invite Mr. Ángel Nerizo in order to talk about digital economy. Ángel is responsible for the positioning of company AT&T in some regulatory affairs, with a focus in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and the Caribbean. He was also head of the LATAM and Caribbean unit for the OECD Center of Development, coordinating the OECD publications on the region, Economic Perspectives for Latin America. He was also leader specialist in Social Security and Labor Unit of the Inter-American Development Bank. He was also advisor to the Economic Office of the President of Spain, and also main lead of the BBVA Bank, specialized in analysis on new technologies, economic growth, fiscal policies in Latin America. Ángel is expert of the Lancet Commission on COVID-19 for the Regional Group for Latin America, member of the Business Economic Council, and he also is member of the Policy Group for GSMA, co-president of the work group of OECD on digital transformation and emerging economies. He's also a member of the board in Colombia. Ángel holds a PhD in public economics, and also a diploma from the Complutense University in Madrid. Ángel, I have two questions for you. How can we design new financing mechanisms in order to connect Latin American people? What is the role of the public and private sectors in attaining this objective? Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Pablo Sanguinetti, Mauricio Aguela, for the opportunity of being here, talking among friends. We are older, so our resume is also longer, as Jorge was reading, but this is a pleasure for me to share with you what we see from AT&T in Latin America. We see that that innovation will be digital or will not be at all. However, recovery and the economic recovery of Latin America will be equitable, gender equitable. And we are surrounded by experts, but few women experts. We need to put the focus there. In the digital space, we still see a gender, an internet, female internet use between men and women of around 10%, because women are still not enough numbers participating in the enterprises. So when women receive financing, they receive 20% less than men. We see that 1/3 of students in technical programs are women, but only 1 out of 10 tech companies are led by women. And we also see a lower number of women graduating in technical programs. So recovery has to be digital, but inclusive, gender inclusive. And if CAF has not yet started a dialogue on women and empowerment, I suggest this, because it's a driving force that we need to promote. Now, moving on to the question in relation to what Avinash said, technology has allowed us to study, to educate ourselves, to work, to do business all through these pandemic months, 15 months in pandemic in Latin America. Traffic has gone up, even 40%. But I like to talk about statistics. Juan and Raul Cas talked about the investment in new technologies in their study, and Latin America in 2020, in per capita terms, invested 6% less than in 2019. 6% less investments. We are talking about an investment, a region that invested 60% less than Asia, 1.5 times less than Europe, and 2.5 times less than the US. So if we think about the situation, I hear digital transformation in everything, but we are still not seeing this in digital investments and communications. That's why public and private partnerships are very important, because the COVID is not leveling the field. We have a deficit in digital investments in the region, and this is quantified in dozens of billion dollars. And we need to take action. How can we take action, public and private sector together? First, we need to think about connecting Latin America for 2050, not for 2022. This means thousands and millions of dollars. This means the need to engage each and every stakeholder, non-traditional stakeholders too, that invest in this sector, like the big platforms, and investment and development banks. Because when I talk about thinking big, and in line with what Nelson also said in his presentation, we need to invest in education. So technical programs, analytical programs, and soft programs, soft skills are key for digital transformation. So we need to sit down, private and public sectors. Let's launch education programs from 3 to 6 months. Let's train people in those skills, technical and digital skills, that companies are not finding. And when I talk about thinking big, we need to update our regulatory digital regulations. 20 years ago, we didn't have Cabify, Rappi, Globo, Uber. 15 years ago, we worked in a different manner. So updating our regulatory frameworks in the digital sector is key. Number 2, we need to close the digital gap, but we need to work on good policies, policies that, for instance, benefits incentives. The reform in Mexico opened up many investments, including AT&T. And also innovation. There are many things we still don't know about the digital sector. Colombia is launching regulatory sandboxes. That is very good, because we cannot regulate like we used to in the past. And finally, we need to coordinate ourselves. The private sector is doing many things. Jorge, you mentioned a list of positions. I'm trying to work OECD together with GSME, all the business organizations that you mentioned also. We are trying to work together. We are trying to join the multilateral sector, and CAF together with the IMF and the World Bank have a key role, because mobilizing resources, ideas, and policies that our region needs is unprecedented. Thank you, Angel. And you mentioned the investments in the region. And a point that is a little bit worrying, I would say, is that this is taking place in a context where the level is lower compared to other advanced countries. And this is very worrying. And you mentioned that recovery will be digital or will not be at all. Recovery will require the private sector engagement or will not be at all. This is what you mentioned, and it's very interesting indeed. And a second question, how is it that the digitalization of productive processes and the use of advanced technologies, like the fourth industrial revolution, could provide and could help productivity grow? And how can we incentivize the use of technologies in the region? Jorge, the good thing about having these two rounds of answers is that first I can talk about challenges, and now I have the option and the opportunity to be optimistic. We have to be optimistic. Of course, we have many challenges. 90% of our companies are connected, but only 50% of the companies in Latin America use the internet to purchase inputs and supplies. So this is also a point to consider. And then there is a small number of companies that use the Internet of Things and machine learning and other things. So I really welcome that CAF puts the focus on this. Latin America should not only be a consumer of digital content, but should also be a leader and a player in offering as well. There is a lot of things. There are lots of things to win. We have young people, passionate for technology. And in this dialogue, we also see sectors that seem not to be together, but they are together. The digital, the agribusiness, tourism, and I would also include the creative industry. Everybody could really create and make a good driver and cluster. Of course, we've been hit hard by COVID, but we can win half Brazil, according to Google, if we are able to make a good digital transformation. And again, I reiterate, investment in telecommunications that we are not seeing fully. We are talking about digital transformation, but we need more investments in education, and a more intelligent regulatory framework. We have a green, digital, and post-pandemic future, a GDP future. So I think the agenda is clear, and I think that the initiatives and dialogues like CAF is promoting are key. We are going to join the public sector, private and public together, for a more inclusive and dynamic Latin America. Thank you, Angel. And you mentioned this idea of having ambition. Latin America can do much more than just be a great consumer of digital technologies, right? And Latin America should be a player as a offering services and offering more in the digital sector. I think that is a key point for the greater participation in the 21st century. Angel, thank you very much for your feedback. Thank you for sharing your views, which are so important for our region. And now I invite Gabriel Amaro in order to talk about agro-industry. Gabriel is industrial engineer from the Engineering University and the private School of Applied Sciences in Madrid. Currently, he is executive director of AGAP, and he was also manager of Confiap. He was executive of Confaco, general manager of Simber, developing activities, business activities and private activities in services, industry, in consulting services. He also worked in the public sector as head of cabinet, as advisor to the ministries of economy and finance and production and communications. He's member of the project committee of pro-investment, consultant of the Ministry of Economy, head of the Office of Provisional Standardization. He is also manager of operations of ONP, director of the Provisional Reserves Fund for NAPO, among other positions. He is also part of the Prom Peru Board of Association of Citizens, and he was awarded the City Prize for the Best Company. Gabriel, thank you for being with us today. I have two questions. The first, how can we include the small producers, the small farmers in the agro-exporting value chains? What is the experience of Peru?
Thank you, Jorge, for the invitation, and to all CAF team. I'm really glad to be here. There's a series of basic elements that are required in order to prepare the small farmers to integrate them into a modern age. The first is strengthening and professionalization of the associative model. That is, to think that a cooperative or an association of farmers needs to work as a company. That is, a company with an independent management, with indicators and targets, with a clear orientation towards the market. I think that this is the most important topic. We need to help small farmers to have associations that are strengthened and with a different mindset, with a different way of considering associations. There's other elements as access to credit and insurance with acceptable rates. As you know, agriculture is a strategic sector of our countries, but in our countries, the most important percentage remains in the domestic market. In the case of Peru, 99% of farmers are individuals, that is, small producers or farmers. So these individuals require to have this access to credit, but not a blind credit, not a loan as it is provided in any other activity of the economy, but a loan that goes along other issues that allow sustainability in the activity. For example, to support technical assistance and training, and also a traceability of what they do with the loan they received. Why? Well, in order to be able to support them in case of any contingency, and this loan should be really affordable, and it could be used for the next cycle. As you know, the agriculture is cyclical, so some certain crops have only one campaign per year, but others have two, and it is cyclical. Then second is the formalization of farming properties. A way of accessing credit, more affordable credits, is by having the property with a formal title. This is one of the big deficiencies that we have in a country. In Peru, we have the same case. I mentioned technical assistance and ongoing training on behalf of government agencies, but also on behalf of the academia and private institutions. Another important topic is to change this risk matrix and replace it with a technified risk. This allows farmers to manage the fields in a better way, and also to have less increased cost, because this could make the the use of pesticides more efficient. And also the market is more attentive to what they consume, and they're more concerned about what they consume. Therefore, small farmers need to be prepared in order to adopt good practices in the agricultural sector. For instance, to have a certificate of good practices in the manufacturing sector is a global gap. So therefore, we should help them to introduce them in how to handle these good practices in the farming sector, to have access to products that are fit for health and that could be traded with no problems in the market. And finally, these assistance that these small farmers need to receive in order to include them in the modern change of production of farming sectors. So in order to connect them and turn this last point into a reality, we have several tasks to do. It is not an easy topic because many times in government plans or agricultural plans of countries, in the regulations that different states issue, both the congresses and executive branch, well, they support the farmers, but the outcomes is not always favorable to them. Why? Because it is not only a question of acting over these small farmers, that is a family-run farming. Agriculture is part of a global system, as we all know, and we have the intervention of different stakeholders in this modern change that is made up by the modern activity and the formal activity of agriculture that service domestic and international market with the standards that apply in order to have access to those markets. So in order for these small farmers to have access to these chains and in order to include them to these modern chains, well, we need to strengthen the whole chain. And in order to do this, we need to have certain elements and conditions that are structural and that need to be kept. This is why in the public discourse of public policies, well, they can not only talk about support to small farmers, but this support needs to be done in a systematic way. In 2016, there was a document that was published by the Ministries of Agriculture of the OECD countries. They said that agriculture is an economic sector that is different, and therefore it should be treated differently because of there's certain connotation, and it is also submitted to harder and wider risks more than any other economic sector. And this is why public policies also need to give security regarding the respect of private properties, because the purpose of a small farmer is not only to obtain a product that is a high yield product, but also to be able to place this product in the market, in a free market, not in a controlled market with a controlled price, but in a free market. And in order to do so, there's also a need for trust between the private and the public sector. And on top of this, re-engineering of the whole regulations should be done. That is, all the regulations that regulate the farming industry, both small farmers that need to formalize the properties and they need to be able to have access to a formal market, but also large producers that are behaving under all the current regulations. I was in a presentation the other day in a prestigious private university together with a public agency. It was about agriculture, and there was a chart in which I couldn't have all the steps in the chart, that a formal producing unit need to comply with in order to be able to have formal agriculture in a country, and with how many public agencies they need to interact in order to have a product that complied with all the requirements. So we don't need to have a lot of regulations and obligations, but we need to clean these up in order to make regulations effective and efficient without overcosts, and so as to be able to have a sustainable activity. We talk a lot about sustainability, but this also has to do with the survival and the development of productive units. Also, to promote the clusters that we have in different valleys that have been created due to the agriculture activity. So these clusters, we not only have family-run producers, but we have a small and medium and large-sized companies, but all the cross-cutting industries that offer services to the farming sector. There's also an essential element that is the institutional strengthening, but this needs to go through a change. That is, I'm talking about a change in public institutions and public agencies, because they need to be guided towards the market. Why? Because the market will establish regulatory basis of the stakeholders that are competing in a free market. Whether we call it the Ministry of Agriculture, the Health Authority, we have the National Authority of Agricultural Research or Foreign Trade. So if all these public agencies do not have in their DNA the need for a creation of an adequate business environment in order to have a sustainable business activity, both in small, medium-sized companies or the large companies, this will not be sustainable, because the small farmers will never be able to get included in formal chains, because it's a very high bar and they will not be able to comply with all the regulations. And what has happened in Peru is that millions and millions of US dollars are spent in programs to promote the small farming agriculture, and there's no right outcomes because they lack a perspective, a market perspective, that is to respect and to keep on promoting the free trade. I always explain, in the case of Peru, for instance, we have 33 million of Peruvian consumers. But if we only remain with this perspective, we will lose, because we also connected to international markets through trade agreements. We have agreements with the most important economies in the world. We have just passed the CTPP, that is an agreement with many countries of Pacific Asian, with China and the most important economies of the world. So therefore, the perspectives need to change. That is the outlook that we need to have in public policies in order to be able to assist small farmers that have or that run a family-owned activity to a modern and competitive vision with a full range of possibilities to access the international and national market, that it's very much competitive. It's a different level of competitiveness. And in order to do this, we need an internal transformation. Peru has gone through this path because today the modern agribusiness is number 12 in the world, with one of the most important countries that is exporters of fruits and vegetables. So we've had over 20 years of transformation in our matrix and in development and in the business sector, but we've been able to achieve this. We still have a long way to go. There's also other issues, connectivity, to integrate the area of the forest and the coast with roads, or for instance, the chain of coal for the industry, for instance. Otherwise, the sustainable agriculture would not survive. So in summary, this can be achieved. There's a clear path to do so. The private sector has already walked along this path, but we still need in public policies to transform this in order to include the small farmers and get this sustainability that goes beyond administrations and that goes hand in hand with the private sector. This is the only way of doing this. All the rest are just romantic objectives or populism. That is, we have this very clear. It's very clear in the private sector. The formula is already there. We have walked this path, and we are always willing. I am part of the Association of a Trade Union Agriculture Farmers in Peru, and we have proposals of public policies, proposals, and also support to the authorities in order to achieve these growth objectives that we have in terms of economic growth and sustainable growth. Gabriel, my second question goes in line with what you have just mentioned. How can trade unions in the sector and the government work together in order to improve the agricultural sector of a country? And what are the lines of work that need to be coordinated? Thank you for the question. I think it's a very important question. What we need to have in mind is that those who generate wealth in a country is the private sector. It's individuals who risk the capital and who live in an ecosystem that is provided by the country for you to develop. So this private sector as a stakeholder is the one that invests and creates jobs. And the private sector can act in a free market. What we need in our countries is to develop a joint work between the public and the private sector in an environment of trust. Administrations and government may change, but the private sector remains. Citizens remain. They still need to keep on developing themselves. And what we are aiming for, and CAF also, is to have multilateral agreements between organizations and trade unions, is to be able to achieve economic growth and development in a competitive way, but with social development, because this increases the well-being of our countries. It's a win-win situation, and this is how we envision this from the private sector. This is why this private-public joint work is very important. We are already playing this game, but the government is not, because the private sector is risking with the capital, and the small family-owned farmer is part of the private sectors because they invest in the hectare and a half, with the time, with the staff. They invest their savings because they want to have a production in order to survive and improve their well-being. If they do not have the previously explained conditions, this will be impossible. If the public sector does not accept the help from the organized private sector, the private sector has governance, and this is through the business trade unions. And the first thing that governments need to do is to trust these business sectors, trade unions, because the public policies, and we have a first topic in which we can assist from the private sector, and we've been doing this from organizations. Public policies cannot be applied from a desk. Public policies need to be implemented with the sectors and with the stakeholders, with those who have proven to be successful, and that they're making an effort to comply with all the different regulations. These stakeholders that where the private sector is represented through trade unions, well, we know exactly what is failing in the regulation. We know exactly what we need to be competitive. I have given some conferences in universities. I always get invited to talk about the agriculture, the business sector, to talk about what can be done in the country. And what I always repeat is I don't like to talk about ideologies. I don't talk about this. But the best government plan that any administration could have in any of our countries is written. And we haven't written. It's in the World Economic Forum. It's a global competitiveness. And this is the X-ray of what a country needs to have to be number one in the world. In the agricultural modern sector in Peru, I explained that we are in the 12th position in the world, but we do not compare ourselves. We are 65 of 141 with 66 or 67, but we compare with the first 10 of the ranking. This is why we've been able to achieve position 12th, and we aspire to be among the 3 first ones in the world, and we are able to achieve this. We have demonstrated this. There's a long way to go. This not only in the agricultural sector, but in all other aspects. In a company is sustainable not only because they comply with environmental regulations, human rights, and labor laws. Yes, this is true, but it is also sustainable when they can keep themselves in a ultra-competitive market, as the international market. This is where they prove to be competitive. So this is the environment in which the private sector, in an organized way, can cooperate a lot in the well-being, to the well-being of citizens and to the development of the whole country. In Peru, we did a very interesting drill that was the creation of technical working groups in which we had the public sector in different areas. For instance, we have an agro-exporting area in the case of agriculture led by the Ministry of Agriculture. And there we just got together to analyze all the regulatory topics that we needed to solve in order to grow in competitiveness and to make the sector grow and have a stronger impact on the country. This drill was very good, but it was diluted in time, not because of the private sector, because the private sector was always willing to work and they demanded for this working group. But many times the administrations lose due to political issues, well, they lose this initial momentum. I think we do not have to lose sight. We have an important task to do in our countries. We need to be able to turn into developed countries. The good thing is that we have all the potentialities to do so. We have the knowledge, we have the road map, and we have the allies to be able to achieve it. We still lack the will, and we need to create this environment of trust and joint work. This is a message that we want to convey from ADAPT to all the governments. Now we are with a new administration that is starting today, so we are ready to help the new administration and the country to develop our potentialities in the agricultural sector and to be able to reach this economic development. Excellent, Gabriel. Thank you very much. Very important topics, especially regarding the private sector and its role. That has a very important role in our economies. Thank you for sharing your views with us. Finally, we're going to talk about a digital economy. I will invite Viviana Vanegas. She is Deputy Director of Prospectiva Digital from the National Planning Department in Colombia, with professional experience in technical and regulatory topics and telecommunications and the analysis of public policies. She's chief economist of the University of Alto Lima and Masters of Economy in the University of Los Angeles. She's also been advisor in the Commission of Regulations and editorial of a magazine in economics, and she's been professor of macroeconomics in Los Andes University. Viviana, thank you for being with us today. I have a couple of questions for you too. How can we increase the adoption of digital technologies in all the segments of the population? And how can we generate the capabilities of use beyond the connectivity and affordability? Thank you. Thank you, CAF, for this invitation. I'm going to be to the point and also to gather also other ideas that other panel members have already discussed. So I would like to give some key messages. Well, the crisis of the COVID-19 imposed the adoption of digital technologies in all the areas at work, education, and healthcare sector. And as some have said, it's important to strengthen the capabilities of the public sector in order to foster the services and the access for citizens. And this is especially important due to the virtuality and many things that were done face-to-face and now they have to be done online. So we believe that governments need to set the example. And the third message is to involve clearly the private sector as a very important stakeholder in order to support the development of all these skills. But I am in the National Department of Planning, so in the digital ecosystems has migrated because it's not only the infrastructure, but also the digital transformation, but we already have other elements or characteristics that need to be involved. One of them is the approach from Prospectiva that we're never prepared for the pandemic, and precisely technology moves really fast, and these are topics that we cannot ignore in our prospective vision. So this is an element that we need to include within the digital ecosystem, and also the infrastructure of data that is quite relevant, that is for the efficient use of data to make data-based decision, the governance of data. And here I would like to thank CAF because we are moving forward in one of the consulting services that we're doing together with the ITC ministries and the digital transformation that belongs to the presidency of the Republic of Colombia. So all these are relevant topics, as is e-commerce. So facing all this based on our mission as a planning agency and articulating, we issued a series of public policies that are the compass documents these are the roadmap that allows us to establish in the short, mid and long term what are the actions with the private and public sectors. So how we can face all these reactivation challenges. We identified from the digital part to accelerate this transformation. So we have a chapter that is specially dedicated to this. So there's 3 lines. First, to consolidate the connectivity among all the territories. I think that even though this is something that we repeat in all the events, this is the basic in order to move forward. So we are advancing in a study that is how to map the different alternative technologies, non-traditional technologies, because in the case of Colombia, we have done a lot of effort from the Ministry of ITCs to connect, but we know that the last mile or sectors in which they don't have these technologies are really quite complex. So to close this digital gap or divide is more complex. So we need to analyze what other options there are. The second point is to accelerate the digitalization of all the different procedures among citizens. And a third point is to strengthen the data infrastructure. So these three axles that are in this document corpus, that is one of the most recent documents that has been issued, and I wanted to comment this, that the purpose is to see not only what we're doing, because what happens sometimes is that we want to show all the policies, but we know that in the digital ecosystem, this is something that will never end. We can never say, okay, we will close the digital divide with this. We will always need something else to do. So this is just a contribution to improve on this. Also, our agency has other policies, and this is just general knowledge. One of these ones is COVID-39, that we have 88 technologies to learn. That's in preschool and mid-school. That is to create capabilities or skills through the innovative technologies. I want to mention this due to the relevance that is implies in the time and age we're living. So we've been creating these labs of education innovation to strengthen the skills of students and also teachers and professors. And this is quite relevant today. There's other public policy that we issued in 2019, but since this is still roadmaps, it's a COVID 3935 about digital transformation and artificial intelligence. So this is a component that has to do with developing the human capital facing the fourth industrial revolution. So we want to create these learning environments, conventional and non-conventional, in order to combine them with emerging technologies. So I'm just commenting this with the purpose of looking at what are all the things that we need to do, because all the different projects end up creating more work. So what happens with all these new technologies, with e-commerce? This is a huge change. So we're going and moving forward step by step. So we're also about to issue another document for the youth in Colombia. We're going through a harsh situation regarding the opportunities for young people. So within the National Planning Department, we're also creating a roadmap to offer certain opportunities from the ICT sector. We are strengthening the skills of young people in order to insert efficiency in the digital society. For example, one of the actions is that we have training quotas regarding data for the youth, that is a development of audiovisual projects, or also actions in order to handle the internet. So this is just for you to have an idea of all the different things that we're working on. The digital ecosystem, well, of course, connectivity is always our priority, not only the use and the appropriation, because digital ecosystem is everything. But now we're involving with this ecosystem a perspective vision, that this cannot be analyzed in a different ways. And additionally, we are including the data infrastructure. So this is just so that you can have an idea of how we are trying to contribute regarding the digital contribution. And it's only a small contribution, because we will always need more to do. Excellent, Viviana. Very rich contributions. And from here, I have a second question. Considering all the experience that you have just commented, what could be a menu of reform of public policies in order to develop the digital industries in the region that is beyond Colombia, in order to increase the digitalization of production and to invest more in quality infrastructure?
Thank you, Jorge. And in this regard, before telling you which ones we consider that could be a menu of policies, regardless of the characteristics of each economy and each country, a good menu of policy reforms should strengthen digital enablers. I think that is key to each economy. So, of course, infrastructures, competencies, and capacities. Those would be the three most important. And of course, we should promote the digital transformation of the productive sector. When we talk about digital transformation, we need to think about cross-cutting areas. We cannot talk about digital transformation isolated, but we always need to consider it in all the sectors with a future perspective. I want to share with you what we've been doing at our department. So everything is done with the ultimate goal of being in line with those pending issues in closing digital gaps and avoiding lagging behind in the digital events. This is inevitable. We cannot fully close the digital gap. We just can make the most of not creating a larger gap. So if we talk about public policies for the development and the digital infrastructure in general related to connectivity, telecommunications, so on and so forth, but it's also important to talk about data exchange. Data is key. Any system must be sustainable, efficient, and secure. This is a very important pillar. But I wanted to talk about data infrastructure. Considering the relevance of data for decision making, it is fundamental to keep on strengthening a policy framework that enables data for the different players of society. So we need a roadmap that fully commits the actions from public, private actors, and the economy in the short and mid-term in order to use data infrastructures and improve data infrastructures in every country, not just Colombia. Of course, we will have to support this deployment. So, at present, in the Compass 4023 of economic recovery of the country, in the digital chapter, we are working with the digital transformation and the ICT ministry on a data infrastructure plan. First, we want to have master and reference data management. This is one of the main topics that we are working on. In the case of Colombia, the solidarity the need that we had during the pandemic made this evident. Second, we need to create spaces to exchange data among sectors. This is a challenge, but this is also an action that we are taking. And finally, the strengthening of capacities of different players. We want to have a governance model. Otherwise, this plan, of course, will not be sustainable in time if it didn't have the support of the government. So some of the public policies that we are working on are those related to technical capacity building. In the case of e-commerce, for example, which was another topic that we are working on, but not e-commerce as we've always known it. However, an e-commerce that must reach rural areas, SMEs. Getting there is not easy, and you know how hard it is. Getting to the rural sector, rural areas has to do with digital ownership, continuity, connectivity. So sometimes it's easier to see the general landscape. However, getting there is not easy. That's why the Compass documents are very important, because we fully commit and engage private and public entities with their resources to help us meet these needs. Coordination sounds easy, but you know that it is not. And finally, I wanted to tell you that an important feature that any public policy must have in each and every country in terms of digital development is that they should have a prospective approach, because this will help us create robust policies for the future, for a desired future. So that, of course, is related to dynamics, uncertainties that we may have in digital transformation, in the productive sector. So my department has really made headway in creating this type of approach. This year, we created a consulting service that designed a prospective methodology to strengthen the formulation of policies in Colombia. So this was not an option. It was a must that we had to do, and this is what we've done. So the key messages: connectivity, of course, is something that we have to emphasize, digital transformation, and the focus on data infrastructure. CAF has been so supportive in this aspect. Prospective methodologies and e-commerce on the way. Thank you. Thank you, Viviana, for these key experiences in Colombia. Very rich feedback for the region, as we can see. And by way of closing, instead of making a conventional closing, I would like to do something different. I would like to emphasize some messages, key messages that were very well explained by the panelists. So just randomly, I heard these terms: private sector, opportunities, public-private cooperation, systemic view, good practices, human capital, capacities, innovation, technologies, strategy, employment, infrastructure, and prospective approach, as Viviana just mentioned, but also other presenters. I think that these concepts speak for themselves, and it is clear that the three sectors are very well connected. There are many common points, many challenges, but many solutions that could be applied to the three sectors, particularly in such a challenging century as we are going through, where we really need to think outside the box if we really want to make headway and create the necessary conditions for people to advance and develop and finally share a better quality of life for all. So I will stop my participation here and I give the floor to Lorena again. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for the participants for being part of this session. Lorena? Thank you, Jorge. Thanks a lot to the guest speakers. It's been great to have listened to you all. We want to thank you very much for joining us. But before we leave, I would like to remind you that the studies presented today can be downloaded to cioteca.caf.com, cioteca.caf.com. All the studies are ready for you to download, and I would like to invite you to the next edition of this dialogue cycle next August 18, where we are going to talk about policies for social inclusion. You will find the information in www.caf.com. Thank you on behalf of CAF for having participated. Have a great day. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.